Have you ever sat quietly and wondered when everything started to change between you and your children? Not just the everyday changes that time brings, like the house growing quiet or holidays feeling a little shorter, but something deeper, the way they speak to you now, the way they look at you, or worse, the way they don't, the weight of expectation behind their words, that creeping feeling that you've somehow become expendable, or worse, only useful when they need something. If you've ever sat with that ache in your chest, trying to make sense of how your own children can make you feel guilty for simply living your own life, then you are not alone. Many parents in their 60s, 70s, even 80s feel this. It's not about blaming anyone. It's about finally saying the truth out loud. There comes a moment in every parent's life, especially later in life, when love starts to come tangled with guilt. Not because we love less, but because we're expected to give more time, more money, more silence, more understanding. Even when we're tired, even when we're hurting, even when we've already given everything we could. And sometimes, the people we love most, our children, learn how to use guilt like a quiet weapon. They may not even realize they're doing it, but you feel it in your bones, in your heart, in the way you question your every decision. Am I being selfish? Am I a bad parent for saying no? Will they stop calling if I don't help this time? It doesn't start with something big. It rarely does. It starts with subtle things, like when Helen's daughter, Sophie, called last month. Helen, a widow in her late 60s, had just booked a trip with a friend a week by the sea, something she hadn't done in years. When she shared the news, Sophie's response wasn't joy. It was silence, followed by a sharp, "Well, I guess we'll have to find someone else to watch the kids. I just thought you'd want to help." Helen laughed it off at first, but later that night, she sat on her bed staring at the travel brochure, wondering if she should cancel, her stomach twisted with guilt, not because she did anything wrong, but because Sophie knew exactly how to say just enough, not too much, not too little to make her mother feel bad for choosing herself. That's the first guilt tactic, the "you owe me" silence. It's not shouting, it's not threats. It's the quiet withdrawal of warmth or kindness when you make a choice that doesn't serve them. Suddenly, your joy is met with coldness, your independence with distance, and so you start shrinking just to feel connected again, just to stop feeling like a bad parent. But you are not a bad parent for having your own life. You are not selfish for having boundaries. And you most certainly do not owe your retirement years to the endless service of everyone else's needs. Let's look at another example. Frank and his son Ryan. Ryan's in his 40s, divorced, raising 2 kids. He calls his dad when he needs help, usually with money. Frank always gave what he could, but last month, Ryan asked for a large amount again. And this time, Frank said no, not angrily. Just honestly, he needed that money for a dental procedure he'd been putting off. Ryan's response: "I guess your teeth matter more than your grandkids having a home." Frank hung up that call and sat in silence for a long time. He didn't sleep that night. He kept hearing the sentence over and over again. It wasn't true, but it hurt. It made him doubt himself. That's the second tactic, the emotional comparison, turning your needs into a competition, making you feel like any choice you make for yourself automatically harms someone else. It's manipulative, even if it's unintentional, and it works. Because you love them, it works. Because you want to be there. You want to help. You want to be needed. But not like this. Not through guilt. Not through fear. At this stage in life, you deserve more than conditional connection. You deserve love that doesn't punish you for resting, for saying no, for putting yourself first once in a while. You've given so much decades of care, sacrifices, sleepless nights, quiet worries you never voiced. And now, in the years when you should be living with dignity, peace, and self-respect, you're being guilted for trying to breathe a little. If this resonates with you, please know something. It's not too late to take back your voice. Guilt has a way of making us forget that we have one. It turns us into quiet versions of ourselves. We smile to keep the peace. We give even when it costs us. And over time, we begin to believe that's just how love works. But love is not guilt, and guilt is not love. When someone uses guilt to get what they want, even our own children, it is not our duty to give in. It is our duty to stand up, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. It doesn't mean you love them less. It means you finally love yourself enough to stop shrinking. Take Grace, for example, a retired teacher, 72 years old. Her son, Caleb, recently asked her to move closer so she could help with childcare. Grace hesitated. She had a life, friends, routines where she lived, but she didn't want to disappoint him. So she packed up everything and moved. Within 6 months, she was exhausted, barely had time for herself, and whenever she tried to express her fatigue, Caleb would sigh and say, "You wanted to be closer to the grandkids, didn't you?" That's the third tactic, twisting your words. Taking your goodwill and flipping it into a trap, making it seem like everything was your idea. So now you're not allowed to feel overwhelmed. It's manipulative. It traps you in your own kindness. And it's one of the hardest forms of guilt to recognize because it comes wearing the face of gratitude. But you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to say, "This is too much." You're allowed to live a life that isn't centered on being available for everyone else 24 hours a day. This is your time, your chapter. And if no one has said this to you in a while, let me say it now. You are not selfish. You are not a bad parent. You are simply remembering that you matter, too. Sometimes, guilt doesn't show up as a demand. It tiptoes in wearing a smile. It sounds like I'm just saying this because I care, or you know how much it would mean to me. But underneath, there's a subtle pressure to fold, to agree, to sacrifice. And because we've been parents for so long, that pressure slips under our skin before we even notice it. Margaret knows that feeling well. She's 68, recently started painting again, something she hadn't done since her 20s. She joined a small local class, started bringing her own lunch, even laughed again like she used to. But one afternoon, her daughter Emily called. Emily had just returned to work after maternity leave and asked Margaret to take the baby full-time. Not a few hours, not a couple of days, full-time. Margaret paused. She explained, gently, that she'd already committed to her art classes twice a week. She offered to help in other ways weekends, evenings, the occasional day. But it wasn't enough for Emily. Her voice changed. The disappointment settled in. She said, "I just thought you'd be more excited to be part of your grandchild's life. I guess I was wrong." That sentence followed Margaret for days. Every brushstroke in class felt heavy. Every laugh turned quieter. It didn't take yelling. It didn't take anger. Just one carefully chosen sentence to make Margaret question whether her joy was a betrayal of love. This is the fourth tactic, the guilt-framed disappointment. It's not a demand. It's a message. You've let me down, even when you've done nothing wrong. And because we want to be seen as loving, generous, present, we carry that disappointment like a stone in our chest. But let's ask something honestly. Why is it always you who must give something up to prove your love? Why must it always be your time, your health, your peace? This is where the deeper wound lies. Somewhere along the line, many of us started to believe that being a good parent meant being endlessly available, even when our children are adults, even when we are tired, even when we've already given decades of our lives to raising, protecting, and supporting them somewhere. We absorb the lie that saying no means we're not loving enough. But that is not love. That is obligation, polished to look like devotion. Frank once said something after a difficult conversation with his son, Ryan. He said, "It feels like love has become a transaction. Like if I don't give what he wants, I'm punished with silence." And that's the quiet pain. Many don't talk about the withdrawal, not in words, but in tone, in calls that don't come, in visits that feel colder. In updates you learn secondhand from others because you didn't play along. This is the fifth guilt tactic, conditional connection. Love offered only when you comply. Presence given only when you agree. The subtle message being, do what I want, and I'll stay close. Don't, and you'll be left out. It's emotional control, wrapped in family ties. And it's heartbreaking, because it touches your deepest fears, not of aging, but of being forgotten, being left behind, being unloved by the very ones you sacrificed for. But here's the quiet truth. Even if it stings, love that is only given when you are useful is not love. It is convenience. It is comfort dressed as connection. You are not here to be convenient. You are not here to be someone else's fallback plan. You are here to live fully, to rest, to laugh, to say yes because you wanna, and no because you need to, not to be punished for your choices, not to feel guilty for your joy. Think of Helen again. She did go on that seaside trip after all. Her friend, Grace, convinced her to keep the booking. The first few days were hard. She felt selfish. But then, on the third morning, sitting by the waves with a cup of warm tea in hand, she said out loud, "I forgot I could feel this peaceful." Sometimes, guilt becomes so familiar we forget what peace feels like. We forget what a whole breath feels like. But it's still there waiting for us. Setting boundaries isn't about creating distance. It's about creating clarity. It's about saying, "I love you, but I also love me." And in a life where you've poured so much into others, that's not selfish. That's sacred. You don't have to explain yourself every time you say no. You don't need to justify every choice that brings you joy. You're allowed to have days that are just for you, hours that are quiet, decisions that don't include anyone else. And if someone, yes, even your own child, tries to use guilt to control or silence you, remember, guilt is not a reason to give up your freedom. It's a sign that something needs to change. Chloe, a grandmother of 5, once wrote in her journal, "I thought if I didn't bend, I'd break the relationship. But the more I bent, the more I disappeared." That line stays with me because it's not about blame. It's about visibility. The older we get, the more society encourages us to shrink, to fade into the background, to become quietly helpful. But that's not your story. You don't have to disappear just to be loved. You don't have to erase your desires just to keep the peace. You don't have to surrender your truth just because someone else is uncomfortable with your boundaries. You have the right to live a life that is whole, not just helpful. This doesn't mean turning away from your family. It means turning toward yourself gently, patiently, but firmly, rebuilding the inner compass that guides your yes and your no, reclaiming the power that was never truly lost, only buried under years of guilt and expectation. And when you begin to stand a little taller, speak a little more honestly, say not today without apology, you'll find something remarkable. Not resentment, not chaos, but relief. And maybe, just maybe, respect. Not because you demanded it, but because you stopped letting guilt define your love. There's a subtle shift that begins to happen when you stop explaining yourself. Not loudly, not defiantly, but in that calm, rooted way that says, "I've earned my peace, and I'm gonna live in it." You stop rushing to soften your boundaries. You stop apologizing for needing space. You start to remember the version of yourself that wasn't always waiting for permission. And something strange happens, not just within you, but around you. The same people who once leaned heavily on guilt to get their way begin to step back. Not always gracefully, sometimes with confusion, sometimes with pushback. But they notice because there's a different energy in your voice now, a stillness, a clarity. You're no longer asking to be seen. You are simply being. That was the case with Jack, a 70-year-old former carpenter who always said yes, even when it hurt, even when it meant postponing his own doctor appointments or canceling plans with his friends. His daughter, Hannah, had grown used to him jumping in whenever she needed him, watching the kids, fixing things around the house, giving her money when things got tight. Jack loved being there for her. He really did. But one day, after she dropped off the kids, last minute for the 3rd time that week, Jack felt it. The weariness, the resentment he didn't want to admit. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He simply told her, gently, "I love helping when I can, but I'm starting to feel worn down. I need some rest this weekend." Hannah was surprised. There was silence. Then, a small, "Okay, no fight, no drama." Just a quiet moment where something shifted. Jack said no without guilt, and the sky didn't fall. The relationship didn't break, but something inside him stood taller. This is how the restoration begins. It doesn't look like revenge or confrontation. It looks like rest. It looks like a walk you take alone without your phone. It looks like spending time with people who make you laugh without needing anything from you. It looks like a day spent tending your garden, or reading in your favorite chair, or joining that book club you always said you'd try. Not because someone approved it, but because you chose it. The guilt starts to fade when you begin living for yourself again. And that's the truth no one tells you after 60. Your joy is not irresponsible. Your rest is not laziness. Your voice is not a disruption. It is necessary. It is healing. It is the quiet thread that stitches your sense of self back together. Emily, the woman we spoke of earlier, the one who tried to guilt her mother Margaret into full-time childcare, did come around. Not immediately. At first, she was distant. Margaret didn't push. She continued going to her art classes. She shared her paintings online. She even started selling a few at a local market. Slowly, Emily began to call again, not to ask for something, but just to chat. The tone had changed. There was a different kind of respect now, not based on obligation, but admiration. You see, people begin to treat you differently when you treat yourself differently. That doesn't mean they'll become who you want them to be, but they will adjust. They will sense the change, and some of them, maybe not all, will grow with you. But even if they don't, you still win, because you are no longer a prisoner of their moods, no longer ruled by their approval, no longer waiting to be allowed to feel like a whole person. You've stepped out of that waiting room and into your life. There's something beautiful about that stage. When the fog clears, when the guilt stops making all your decisions, when you can feel again, feel your strength, feel your peace, feel your right to be fully, unapologetically alive. Chloe, the grandmother who once wrote that bending too far made her disappear, told me something in a letter that still echoes in my mind. She said, "The day I stopped asking for their understanding was the day I found my own." That's what this part of life is for. Understanding. Not from them, from yourself, relearning who you are when you're not trying to be perfect, not trying to please, not trying to explain, just being, fully, freely, firmly. You'll find that you laugh more when you're not weighed down by guilt. The food tastes better. That silence feels safer, that your home feels like yours again. Not a base for errands, not a holding cell for favors, but a sanctuary, your sanctuary. And when your children come by, and they will, you meet them from a place of wholeness, not need, not guilt, not obligation, but love, as a clean, healthy love, the kind that doesn't demand or expect or tally favors, the kind that simply is. You don't have to beg for that. You don't have to bargain for that. You become that. There will still be moments of doubt. You'll still have days where the old habits tug at your heart, where you wonder if you were too harsh, where you miss how things used to be. That's okay. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You return to old places with new strength, but you'll know the difference. You'll feel it in your spine, in the way you breathe easier, in the way you say no with kindness, in the way you say yes without resentment, because this space you've carved out is yours. And it's not too late to build something beautiful here. Not out of guilt, not out of what others expect, but out of the deep, quiet knowing that you matter. You always have. You don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. I don't take it lightly that you gave your time, your attention, and maybe even your heart to this conversation. If you're still here, then I know this touched something real in you. Maybe a quiet truth. Maybe an ache you've been carrying alone for far too long. Let me just say this again, from one soul to another. You are not wrong for wanting peace. You are not unloving for having boundaries. You are not a bad parent because you stopped sacrificing every part of yourself. You are simply human, still growing, still unfolding, still worthy. Sometimes it takes us a lifetime to realize that love is not meant to be earned by exhaustion, that we are allowed, yes, even now, even after all these years, to choose ourselves, to rest, to heal, to reclaim the quiet, sacred dignity of living on our own terms. If your heart has felt heavy lately, if you've looked around and wondered where the connection went, or why it seems like you're only noticed when you're needed, I hope today gave you permission to breathe again, to step into your own light, to take up space without apology. You may still carry love for those who hurt you with their guilt. That's okay. Love is not either or. You can love them and still say, "This doesn't feel right." You can care deeply and still say, "Not this time." You can be generous and still protect your own spirit. And you are allowed to have your own dreams even now. They don't have to be big or loud. Maybe it's taking that weekend trip you keep putting off. Maybe it's spending more mornings with a cup of tea and no agenda. Maybe it's writing that story, planting that garden, joining that choir, or finally saying yes to things that fill you up instead of draining you dry. Maybe it's just being still, without guilt, without being needed, without feeling like you have to earn the air you breathe. And maybe that's where real power lives, in the stillness, not the struggle. If you've been walking this path alone, I want to tell you something deeply important. You don't have to keep carrying all this by yourself. There's a whole world of people, many of them right here, who feel what you feel, who know what it's like to be quietly pulled apart by guilt, who have struggled and stumbled and stood back up again. So I'd love to hear from you. Has your relationship with your adult children changed over the years? Have you ever felt the sting of guilt wrapped in love? What helped you heal? Or what are you still learning to let go of? Please share your story in the comments if you feel comfortable. It might help someone else feel a little less alone, and it might help you to put it into words. Sometimes speaking the truth just once is enough to start healing it. And if this message made you feel seen, if it reminded you of your worth, your voice, your quiet strength, I'd truly love for us to stay connected. Click subscribe if you'd like to keep walking this journey together. Not for the numbers, not for vanity, but because I believe we heal better in the company of others who understand. This channel, this space, it's for you, for your heart, for your story, for your next chapter. And no matter what anyone says, even your children, your next chapter is still yours to write, not with guilt, not with fear, but with grace, courage, and a steady hand. Because you are not here to fade. You are not here to shrink. You are here to shine. So rest when you need, say no when it matters, and love yourself with the same fierce devotion you've given to everyone else your whole life. You are not alone. You never were. And the light you've been waiting for, it's been within you all along. Until next time, take care of your heart and don't let anyone, not even your children, dim the light that still burns in you. You deserve to live fully, and you always have,